Three, two, one. Tuesday, March 17th, 2015. We're interviewing Bob Whitney, former program director of WIL Radio in St. Louis and former program director of the Balaban Group of Stations. Hello.
Hi there.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I guess we'll start by asking you exactly how did you get into the radio or broadcasting business?
Well, I had been one of those people who laid in bed at night with a little radio, not so little in those days, 1947, and listened to radio stations from across the country. And I was very much romantically attached to the idea of show business and radio and popular music. And I just wanted to be part of that from way back when I was probably 10 or 11 or 12 years old. And I was lucky enough to actually get into radio when I was 17. I graduated from high school. They started a radio station near my home. I went over there and watched them put up the tower and tried to get friendly with the people who were doing that. Eventually, they needed someone to stand in a little shack and say WCRB while they rode around in the car to see if the signal was as good as they thought it was. It was a 500-watt station, daytime only, signed off at sunset. And I started at $23 a week. And I actually, in 1 year, got up to $34 and bought a new car.
Wow.
And left there to go to Florida. And from then, there's a whole string of radio stations, as a lot of people like I enjoyed in the early career. You would go there when the ratings were down to help them go up, and you would try to leave before they went down again. And that's exactly what I did for a good number of years until I decided to go back to school, and I went to Syracuse University and spent 5 years there on the air at an NBC station, WSYR, where I became, of all things, a night news director. And so I was not in the least musical. I enjoyed the work a lot. I was tired all the time because I went to school all day and worked until midnight. I was in my late 20s. I had got married to an emergency room nurse, thinking that if I were married to her, she would give me the names of the next of kin. And that didn't work out too well, but the marriage was fine, and we had a bunch of children in Syracuse, 3 of them, and moved on from there, and that's when I met Top 40 and rock and roll.
I see. Those were the days when television was starting to take over. The networks, the big radio networks, were sort of putting their money and effort into television, and network programming was starting to die off. And so now I believe you were heading towards Salt Lake City at that time.
That's true. Actually, what happened was an old friend of mine had become a program director of KALL in Salt Lake City, which was one of the new emerging, struggling top 40 stations playing 40 records every 3 hours, 1 new record a week. And he had an idea for Salt Lake City in order to make Call, which was a top 40 rock and roll station, into something a little more acceptable in the Mormon community. He thought it would be nice if I, a newsman from Syracuse, followed the Mormon trail and made phone calls, which were aired every hour on KALL, from all the points from Palmyra, New York, across the country where Brigham Young and the others went so many years ago. And I did that. And as I got closer to Salt Lake City at night and I could hear the radio station, way off in the distance, I could hear my reports of the places where Joseph Smith, the man who was really the head of the Mormon Church at the time, was in jail, and all the adventures that they had in places like Nauvoo, Illinois. And I eventually reached Salt Lake City, having made some 50 of these reports, and I was already kind of well known. So it was sort of a remarkable thing. I did like popular music, and I did like rock and roll music, but I wasn't into it at all. That is to say, I'd never been on the air playing such things. I didn't understand some of the things they did, like all the jingles every couple of minutes. all the promotional announcements for treasure hunts and other things. What happened was that as the homes using radio increased somewhat, which was a happy thing for radio, about 50% of the audience became a popular music or hit single audience. And there was a lot of controversy as to whether you should play a limited number of songs so you're repeating them a great deal, which seemed to boost ratings quite a bit, at least at first, or whether you should have some disc jockeys who talk about the music and who actually choose the records. And this was 1958, 1959, where payola was becoming quite a thing. The congressional hearings and all of the Dick Clark stuff and Alan Freed losing his career. This was all beginning to happen. And it was mostly because of the enormous interest in, and especially among record companies, in selling records, and so that the record business sort of became part of the radio business. So that's sort of what happened when I got to Salt Lake City. We went #1 in Salt Lake City. That was the big thing. You got to be #1, which meant that we probably had about 30% of the audience, or a little more than half of the 50% available to popular music. And because of that, some interest in what I was doing was, the Balaban people who had purchased WIL in St. Louis and KBOX in Dallas and a station in Milwaukee became interested in what the heck you could do to be the winning popular music top 40 station. We were essentially a store's format. That is to say, we had a small list of records, 40 records. We did play the #1 record every hour. We played the #2 and 3 records every other hour. And we stuck to the store's format, but we tried to make production events which were more interesting than the other station. We tried to make our contests more intriguing than our competition, and that's the sort of thing that went on. In most of the markets, there were 2 stations competing for this popular music audience. In St. Louis, however, there was a slight complication because there were 3 stations, KWK, KXOK, which had been purchased by the man who started the whole thing, Todd Stores, and then there was WIL. WIL was kind of a special place, and it was mostly because of the personalities, people like Dick Clayton, Ed Bonner, Jack Carney. These people were personal salesmen, and they were terrific. And I really admired them. They were from the older kind of radio I had been in before. Jack Carney would talk about the family of the bakery where you could go today at his suggestion and get a free raspberry tart. And just tell Jerry that I want you to have that. And he was so convincing that I actually myself, knowing the whole thing was advertising, I would go and get the raspberry tart. It was wonderful radio, but it was wrong. It was wrong for what was going on. In a three-way race in St. Louis, you had to have the numbers. The national advertisers were beginning to recognize radio as being a worthy place to put their advertising. And if you weren't the superior station among the 3, you weren't going to do very well. The only trouble was that when you tightened up the format and asked Jack to please calm down, don't talk quite so much, that audience began to atrophy, and so the local business began to suffer. So I remember a salesman saying to me, do you mean to say that we're going to get rid of all our local business and then we're going to get a little national business? And I said, well, it may not work exactly that way, but we're going to try to get the numbers up. And so we were constantly up against how you talked less and repeated the top hits more often in order just to improve that competitive situation. And we struggled through it. And there were some other complications too. For instance, one of the ways you operated a top 40 station to build the numbers was to play a lot of stuff constantly, jingles, promotions, and all of that. And we did it very easily in places like Dallas, where we were quite successful, because the disc jockey sat there and he could push all the buttons and make things happen right out of his head as he did his show. When we got to St. Louis, the unionized control room operator now had to push about 20 times as many buttons as he ever pushed before. He had to be intuitive to know exactly what was going on with the disc jockey. There was no longer casual conversation, as Jack Carney did with his engineer. And that was difficult. That was difficult. Some of the engineers got a little bit excited about the fun of it all, and they did that. The others complained to the IBEW local, and we had, some real controversy and difficulty in just getting the technology to respond to what we needed at the time, so we could be more like we were in Dallas.
Well, you had mentioned that you took KALL in Salt Lake to #1, and then apparently you were noticed by the McClendon people and by Balaban people. How did you get from Salt Lake to St. Louis?
If I fully understood, I would give you a direct answer. It was a very confusing time. I was a young guy, 30 years old or so, with 3 young children. And I had already moved from Syracuse to Salt Lake and now to Dallas. The day that I had actually contacted McClendon myself. I don't think they were attracted to me. I think it was the other way around, because McClendon was very well known as the coming thing, and I wanted to be the coming thing. So I wrote to the McClendon station in Houston, and I was on a plane on my way to Houston to meet the manager, and I was met at the airport in Dallas, where I was changing planes, by a man named Stan Kaplan, who was John Box's Balaban go-getter, the man who found out how to get things done. And he talked to me. He said, "I understand you're on your way to see a McClendon station." I said, "That's right." He said, "Well, you might want to think about that. Let me tell you about it." So he did, and we wound up at the end of that day with me sending a telegram, if you remember what those were, to the Houston people, telling them, sorry, but I've had a little interruption in my schedule. And I flew to St. Louis with Stan Kaplan. And when I saw that wonderful newsmobile and heard Jack Carney and heard the reverb in the background of the station, I thought, this is the big time. This is not Salt Lake City. And but of course my assignment was to Dallas, and I was there for 1 year, having disconnected the washer and dryer from Salt Lake City and connected it in Dallas.
To K-Box?
To KBOX, yeah,
KBOX.
K-Box. Yeah. Wonderful KBOX, and you may remember that as wonderful WIL. We played that about 10 times an hour. And of course the idea was to give the station a sound that was instantly and completely recognizable. Hopefully that would result in our doing a little something to the 50% McClendon, get some of his audience. And in those days, if you could do that, if the station went up in the numbers, you could get another job, and it would be in a bigger market and for more money. And WIL decided that I should come here and get into this 3-way fray, which I did. And when I realized that KXOK was a Storrs station, the guy who started the whole thing and knew exactly what he was doing, I thought, man, this is a challenge. And of course, there was the challenge of changing what was a very successful local operation at WIL, competing with personalities on KWK, and up against this absolute barn burner of a station, KXOK, with a good signal, and we were at 1430, yes. Not such a good signal. So there were parts of East St. Louis where you couldn't hear us very well. So anyway, we struggled with it, and we struggled through, and the station did pretty well. And actually what I should say is, in this 3-way race, it wasn't that there was a winner. It was that we improved the size of the total popular music audience, and all of us got a piece of it. So in a way, we all did better because of our competition. And of course, St. Louis was very receptive to the popular music. I mean, Chuck Berry was, crazy, and it was absolutely wonderful. Kathy's Clown from the why can't I think of who it, Kathy's Clown? Somebody will know. Uh, the Everly Brothers.
Everly, yeah, that's right.
And of course, it was time for Great Balls of Fire. And lots of things were going on in the pop world. Elvis got out of the Army.
Right.
And in the political realm, we had the Kennedy-Nixon debates. And did you know, and does it seem possible that it was way back then that Desi was divorced by Lucy? And the Donna Reed show was starting. Those were big days in entertainment, and particularly in radio, and especially in popular music radio, and I was thrilled with it all.
Fantastic. Now, I believe you brought in some McKenzie machines.
Ah, the McKenzie machine. One of the big problems in Dallas was that we had no way at all to make a production start anytime we wanted to. We actually had 16-inch record-cutting machines, and we had 16-inch transcription records that you put on the turntable, and you queued it up, and you had to do 3 of those between records, and a disc jockey was just going like this all the time, trying to make it all happen. Well, I thought there must be a way where you push a button, you know. Cart machines, now a mainstay of radio, not yet invented. But I had seen at Disney World, or Disneyland, whatever it was then, a show where they did exactly that. They were able to choose any sound, any recording, and instantly play it. And that thing was a McKenzie machine. It had 5 drawers of little tapes inside, and it had a little keypad, and you could push the keypad and it would fire each one of those loops of tape. So I got one of those in Dallas. And it was remarkable what we were able to do. As a matter of fact, we even produced a newscast which the sales department called The News You Can Dance To. And what it was based on the old March of Time, you know. When we got to St. Louis and actually got the IBEW to let us install that, we would do something like, St. Louis, dum-da-da-dum, you know. And of course that was just so new, unusual, and so crazy that people just did double takes. And that's what we needed, double takes and triple takes and more ratings. And of course, that allowed us to make all of the stuff between the records more interesting and exciting, with little contests like the Principal of the Year contest, which got copied across the country. And of course, that's another thing you wanted to do. You wanted to get copied because then you became personally known as a program director. So those were the days, very exciting. And up through St. Louis, we did pretty well, not always, you know. On the day that the Hooper rating was going to arrive in the mail, we all gathered around waiting for the mailman. You remember the old email, the old mail from the postman?
Yes.
And tear the envelope open, and there it would be. Either you were going to disconnect that dryer again, or you were going to have another little period of time to try and make things even better.
Yes.
Very exciting time.
Now,
Can I stop for 1 second here?
My fraternal grandfather.
Okay. And we're back.
all right. Well, at the time in 1959, it looks like the staff on those top 3 St. Louis stations were as follows. At WIL, there was Dick Clayton, Ed Bonner, Jack Carney, Bob Osborne.
One thing I want to mention is, yeah, take 2 and this time put some fun into it, would you?
Right. Okay, back in 1959, it looks like the WIL staff was composed basically of Dick Clayton, Ed Bonner, Jack Carney, Bob Osborne, and Reed Farrell. Over at KWK, they had Gil Newsom, Gene Davis, and King Richard. And KXOK at the time had Jack Elliott, Gentleman Jim Bradley, Ken Reed, Buddy McGregor, Peter Martin, and Art Rice at night. So basically, when you came into WIL, you had a certain group of staff members, and perhaps they were a little resistant to all these new changes because they were used to doing things the way they had always done them. Can you let us know how that went over when you came aboard and said, well, we're going to try this?
Well, it's kind of an interesting problem that I had because I was very respectful of the talent on the station. It was a different kind of radio, and it was after really a different kind of audience, perhaps an older audience. Most of the people, Ed Bonner and Dick Clayton and Jack Carney, who is probably best remembered of the personalities, were people who could talk to you. And this was an Arthur Godfrey technique. When one of those disc jockeys used the term you, they were talking about you, one person. And you really felt that way because they had mastered this technique. On the other hand, in the top 40 world, the disc jockey's talking to everybody all at the same time. It's a great big party, and everybody is having a wonderful time with lots of noise going on. And it's a party atmosphere. It's not a living room, visit. Well, what do? You can't really compare these two. You can't say that one is better than the other. But if you're after ratings, and there's only one way to get it in that 50% of the pop music rotating music audience, and you've got to get the numbers fast because that's the way you survive as a business, you've got to do something which changes things from the way they are. Now, WIL had a wonderful, local, supportive, loyal audience. There isn't any question about that. And that resulted in a lot of local advertising business. But the changes in radio had to do with the new national buying, which the emerging and growing audience was providing. And so the assignment was to get the numbers up, as simple as that, and those are the terms we used. It was ticklish at WIL, and I had an emotional problem with it because I didn't want to stop Jack Carney from being as talented and terrific as he was, but at the same time, he and I had conversations in which I tried to explain what I thought was the issue, that we had to survive as one of the three competitors. Hopefully, for the Balaban's sake, and perhaps our own, it was important to be better than just okay. So we worked at it. We fought at it. Jack gave a little, Ed Bonner gave a little, and we modified things a little bit so they weren't quite as obnoxious for what I probably at that time called the old liners. And we did improve things. Now, what would have happened if we'd just gotten rid of the whole staff and brought in a whole bunch of, fast-talking top 40 people? I don't really know, but I didn't want that anyway. I wanted what we seemed to achieve in Dallas, which was the sound of feeling good. It was just a happy time all the time. And, of course, the people who didn't want to get into the top 40 world criticized it as only for kids. But it wasn't only for kids. If you went into an automobile repair shop, WIL was probably what you heard. At least we hoped so. And when I would pull up beside a car in traffic and I would hear popular music coming out of a car and I heard, wonderful WIL, wonderful, wonderful, we did it for that car. So those were the challenges. And we hung on to most of that staff, believe it or not, throughout this process. However, I did need a couple of people who would do it the way we did it in Dallas. And Dan Ingram, who I hired in Dallas in 1959, was proselytized from that station, which was a loss to them. And he came to St. Louis, became the morning man. He was, I thought, absolutely fabulous, very, very funny. I asked him to be program director because I was asked to go look at the other two stations. And I became national program director, and Dan did a wonderful job. Later on, he and I left together in 1961 and started a company called Mars Broadcasting, which was a syndicator of contests and jingles, close to New York in Stamford, Connecticut, where Dan could deliver the contests to WABC, and they got to know him real well, and he got a job there.
Yes, that's part of his legend, yes.
Right. Ron Lundy was a complete mystery, never heard of before. He was on a station in Baton Rouge. very, very southern, very, didn't talk a lot, but he would say, "Hello, Mom," you know, or "Hi, hon." And that was enough. That was all it took. And of course, he became a little more verbal as a St. Louis disc jockey, but it was always the happy sound. I thought he was terrific. And he came to Connecticut to Mars Broadcasting to visit, and he really didn't want to visit Mars. He wanted to visit WABC. And he and Dan collaborated, and he got a job there and became, for what, 40 years or something? Maybe only 30. A mainstay, well-known and wonderful disc jockey in New York City. And the same thing happened with Bob Dayton, who was one of the people I hired at WIL, who also went to WABC, which was the biggest top 40 operation in the world. And so my whole gang went there without me. But as you see, I have survived okay.
Definitely. Now, Gene Davis of KWK had made a statement, I guess right before you came into town. He had said, "We are the leader in the radio game of follow the leader in St. Louis. Our station needs some real competition." So you came in and you gave him that competition. And how do you think that WIL did against KWK and KXOK?
I think it was a standoff, but we certainly got noticed, and we certainly got some of their listeners as habit WIL listeners, and we fought back and forth, and we said things like that, which was part of the fun of the radio business. And as I said earlier, we all benefited from the competition because whatever it was when I arrived here, 40% of the audience or something available to popular music became more like 50%, and we each had a share of that. And of course, as the Hooper ratings came in and the Pulse books arrived, we went up and down. Nobody really knew why. It would have been nice if we could have pinned a rise on a particular contest or a particular sequence of jingles or something, but there was no way really to do that. The fact is, KXOK, KWK, and WIL remained the triumvirate popular music stations. WIL decreasing the amount of disc jockey participation in the time on the air, that is, they didn't talk as much. KWK didn't do that quite as fast as we did. Gene and all of them continued to be pretty much what they had become known as. And I don't remember all the particulars because, after all, it was half a century ago. But it was a wonderful time that went by very quickly, and there's no question that we did very well. I was able to achieve, myself personally, being National Program Director for Westinghouse Broadcasting for a couple of years. I went on to station management, which I did not like at all. I liked being either on the air or close to being on the air. And I loved the product. I loved the music, and I loved the audience that it created. I still today like doing a sock hop now and then. So anyway, that's a little picture.
I gotta jump in with a question here. What kind of music do you like? Who are some of the artists that you like?
Joy to the world, all the boys and girls. When it comes to anything where the emphasis is not on the melody, I have a little trouble with it. Like, I don't know how to remember and hum some rock songs, some heavy metal songs, and certainly rap is hard for me culturally. But then I'm an old guy now.
But back in the days, what are some of the artists you like?
I liked Johnny Cash. I liked the crossover from country. I liked the First Edition, and who am I trying to think of? Well, anyway, I liked the harmony groups. Maybe you could mention some. I'm drawing a blank here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have jumped in here, but I was just curious about your personal taste in music. Go ahead, it's back to you.
I liked highly melodic, happy music with a rock sound, but not music where the emphasis was all on the percussion and dissonance.
Yeah.
Right. Well, do you remember any of the contests or promotions that were going on at WIL at the time?
Well, Dan Ingram would personally run contests on what the diet at the school lunch would be. And of course, he had all kinds of crazy names for what they were serving, usually making fun of the school system. On the other hand, we did very well with getting people to get behind their school principal with something which kind of got copied everywhere, the Principal of the Year contest. We had 4 or 5 Principals of the Year, so the year kept changing. We had a thing called the Silver Dollar. The Silver Dollar, all right, it's a contest where we read numbers. They might be license numbers off of cars, and you constantly listen to see if you were the winner. And we would try to offer big sounding prizes. You know, $1,000 seemed like a lot of money, and it also seemed sort of like you could win it. So that was a mainstay. We never did any treasure hunts of the kind where you put the clues at the public library and 1,000 people tear up the library. We didn't do that. Stores did that and did very well in the ratings, but didn't do so well with the community. But we were always trying to think things up, new ways of being as sensational sounding as possible. We played lots of melodic jingles, very melodic and very repetitive. And the disc jockeys always maintained the happy sound that seemed to attract more listeners.
Right, and your playlists were pretty close to what the other two were doing?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, we changed around because for a while it wasn't possible to put the full tight top 40 list in place because the disc jockeys were used to picking their own music. So it took a while. We eventually did it, got to a tight list. KWK, as I remember it, pretty much played extra music. They played some new records, and they had some opinions about the music, which was a way of going in those days. Stores, on the other hand, was as tight as we were. They maintained exactly what they had been successful with in Kansas City and Miami. One of the people in your archives and a member of the Hall of Fame was at WFUN in Miami up against Stores, WQAM. And he was hired to come here to KXOK, I think toward the end of my shift. And he, again, not only got out of Miami, which was a happy note for Stores, but also added a great deal to St. Louis's KXOK.
Who would that be?
That's what I'm trying to think.
Well, let's see. I know Don Pietro Monaco came in and became Johnny Rabbit, but that was probably a few years later.
No, this was not an airman. He was a program director.
Oh, a program director.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? I know all these people and their names. I can't think.
It's like that sometimes.
That'll be an editing point.
Yeah, please.
Well, basically, as you mentioned, after your WIL and Balaban adventure, you went on to co-found Mars Broadcasting, correct?
Yes.
And you were coming up with national jingles and contests for some of the stations that you yourself may have been program director of at some time.
That's
right?
true.
Okay.
That's right.
So, yeah, you were doing this on a national level now. And you kind of had the secret to all that, what could make a station's ratings pop and do good in the Hoopers.
Yes. The principal product was a simple little thing called the Fun Test. And the Fun Test used a couple of popular records with hidden clues in the records. So we were repeating what the product was on the air within the contest. We had over 100 stations in large markets. Almost you could hear Fun Tests almost everywhere you went. And we sustained that for 3.5 years, from 1960 to 1963.5, something like that. We were in New York on WABC, and that started the whole parade of WIL disc jockeys to WABC. And you know the famous story of Bob Dayton, who we called Rockin' Robin Scott, on the air. He was on the air one day, and he played a happy birthday record for the people of Hiroshima, which got him fired. Those were sensitive times. And so that's one of the stories. Jack Carney was actually at WABC, you know that.
Oh,
That was prior to the time when my three guys went there. And he didn't stay there very long. He came back here and I believe went to KMOX.
KMOX, yes.
Yeah. And speaking of KMOX, in understanding what the audience was like, there was no way a new poppin' radio station was going to take any audience from KMOX. You know, it's, and we didn't, of course. Two entirely different kinds of radio service. So our objective was to grow that part of the audience, which was among popular music people, like the old Stores story of the waitresses who drop the money in the jukebox even after they've heard the same songs all night, which led Todd Stores back in Omaha to decide that, well, maybe he could just keep playing the same records over and over again, which no one had ever done before. There was the Hit Parade, which was on once a week and repeated the same songs. And that worked so well that it built itself into a string of radio stations, including KXOK in St. Louis. And that's what we subscribe to, also trying to make the sound a little more appealing than we thought his sound was.
Right, and I think you also had a Dick Clark program on at one point. I remember we have a copy of a Billboard magazine where they ask you for your comments on that, and so you had all this going on, and you also ended up, as you mentioned, being associated with Westinghouse's Group W stations at some point, I guess in the latter 60s.
That's right. In terms of the Dick Clark thing, interestingly enough, Dick and I were born in the same month in the same year, 1929. Dick was the son of a guy who owned a radio station in Utica, New York. Dick went to Syracuse University a couple of years before I did. He was on the same station I was on. I didn't meet him way back then. But after American Bandstand had been on the air for 7 or 8 years, and Dick and his managing people were not sure what was going to happen, they decided he should diversify and get into some other things. He already was in the record business. He also was, of course, on American Bandstand. But they thought that he ought to have a radio show. So I don't remember how it happened, but somehow his people got in touch with us at Mars Broadcasting, and we produced the Dick Clark radio show, which was on, I don't know, 50 some odd stations in the country. And it was highly edited. The way we did it was kind of interesting. We built a studio down under the tracks in Philadelphia, so when Dick got through doing American Bandstand, he would go over there. We would interview some record people, some stars. We would call Dick on the telephone. He would turn on a recorder, and we would tell him what to say. And he would say all those things and then mail us the tape. And one of our people named Bob Oakes would sit there all day and most of the night putting together Dick's voice with whatever else we had recorded. And it actually sounded for all the world like, you know, a live radio show with people talking to each other. Dick never met some of the people he interviewed. So that was an exciting time, and I got to know Dick pretty well during that period. We had so much in common, actually, except that he was popular and I wasn't. But and he looked like a teenager and I didn't. But I remember one time when I went to New York and we were late getting to Philadelphia for his show, and it was raining, and we ran from Avenue of the Americas at ABC right across town to Pennsylvania Station to catch a Metroliner to Philadelphia. There was no other way, you know, except rent a cab or something. And I remember dodging cabs with Dick Clark, and I said, am I really almost getting hit by taxi cabs with Dick Clark? So I was impressed with celebrity, even though I was in the business of celebrity.
Right.
And to make a long story short, we got there. He went on the air, raced in, took off his coat, and he was on the air.
Fantastic. Now, you had spoken earlier about the coming thing, being involved with the coming things. And so in the late 60s, you basically made a jump, a complete change, and went into television. And can you give us some information about that?
Well, there was an interesting business problem, which was always what we were addressing. And the business problem was there were some UHF stations that very few people watched, and certainly it would have been nice if more did. They were running old movies, black and white mostly, and not doing well. And of course, I was in a business which was expanding, and where among young people there was an enormous interest. And I got to thinking one day, why don't we put that on this and have the UHF stations run some popular music, gain some audience, and so forth? Of course, I didn't think through what the heck we'd do for a picture. While we were playing the record, you couldn't have a Dick Clark show with just a bunch of, kids dancing around all the time. I didn't think that would work too well. So, and I had been captivated with the whole idea of special effects anyway. I knew that you could make all kinds of wonderful colors with the regular equipment that's in a television station simply by giving it a few technical difficulties. And so we began to experiment with what you would do while the records were playing. And we did it with amateur, no rehearsal, kids who danced their hearts out, and we made them into different colors, and maybe 3 copies of the same person on the screen at the same time. And also, I met a woman who ran a teenage dance studio, and she was teaching ballerina, but she was interested in popular music. And she had thought for a long time, there isn't any reason you can't do traditional dancing to things like Close to You, stuff like that. And so she began, as I talked to her, to put together some popular music, standard choreographed dancing with the high school students who were in her class. And it was wonderful. And when you added the special effects to things like The Doors' Light My Fire, and I almost burned down the studio one day, having brought my barbecue to the studio, and we, shot the fire with one camera, and we shot the guys with the choreography, and it worked. It worked, and I put together a pilot. Went to Dallas, where I found a guy who was already doing some things like this on the air, and we put together a pilot which I took to U.S. Communications, and I said, you've got a bunch of UHF stations. They're running old movies, you don't have much audience, you don't have any business. How would you like to put this on there? And this was, the headquarters was in Philadelphia, and they had an Atlanta television station which was just full of all the gear we needed. Great big $300,000 tape machines for editing this sort of thing, an active town full of all kinds of young people. And we would go down to the hippie district and find some people who might come and dance and say, by the way, do you have a bikini? Why don't you bring that, because you're going to be a go-go dancer. And they'd show up. And the only time we could record was in the middle of the night. And they would show up with their parents, with costumes and all kinds of things. And we were actually able to grind out one after another of these videos. The record business was starting to promote a little bit by releasing videos of their released pop records, Bobby Sherman, for instance. And so we began to use some of that, but we didn't have very much. And we had some serious stuff too, like Martin Luther King, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. We would go to the library and steal some film, and put together a production while playing Bridge Over Troubled Waters and that sort of thing. And we grew a library, and of course it was top 40 television, so we could repeat these things over and over again. After a while, we began to release the program to other stations. WPIX in New York ran 3 hours of it before Yankee baseball and 2 hours after, which gave us great ratings, which helped us sell other stations. We were on the air in St. Louis, as you know, and Washington, D.C., and prime markets, San Francisco, Sacramento, California. And we released the thing in 2 forms. It had a disc jockey on it. I was one of them, Stocky Bobby Woodstock. And so that you could take the program, you could buy any number of hours, and you could play it with the disc jockey that was on the tape, or you could turn off that audio channel and turn on the one that just had the sound and stick your own disc jockey in there. So that was kind of an innovative feature. Actually, the sales departments of these stations, although they were in trouble without us, were in trouble with us because they didn't know how to sell it. How do you tell someone what this is? You know, the bakery that sells the raspberry tot charts. But we did last 26 weeks. People kind of have a feeling it was longer than that. There is a Facebook page now with old fans on there and some young ones. And so I never would have predicted what that whole experience was like, but it became part of my life. And just this year, just recently before I came to St. Louis to talk to you, we had a celebration in Atlanta for some of the performers. It was interesting to see what they now look like. They now came with their grandchildren. They were 17 at the time they danced. So it's all very thrilling and unusual and a super sort of bunch of memories that I've got about the whole broadcasting business.
Now, what you've been talking about was a show called The Now Explosion.
Yes.
And it did air in St. Louis on KDNL TV, Channel 30, our station, which had just begun in '69. There had not been a UHF station in St. Louis for about 10 or so years. We had a couple. One failed. The other one converted to our Channel 2 station. It's KTVI now, Channel 2. So they got that top spot on the VHF portion of the dial. Then we had nothing until '69 when somebody said, I think we can squeeze another TV station in this market. And they had some innovative ideas of their own. And one of those ideas was to buy, when it became available, the Now Explosion. And at one point, Channel 30 ran 5 hours of the Now Explosion. They would run it, and I wished I would have brought I have a copy of the TV guide that proves this. I hate that I forgot in my rush to get ready. Noon to 5 p.m. on a Saturday. It says at noon, the Now Explosion. Then there's nothing, at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3, and then 5 o'clock, roller derby. Finally something else comes on. And I remember as a kid watching that show and being fascinated, and probably the video I've always remembered the most was Georgie Girl. I don't know why, but that one always had stuck out. When I tried to remember this show, and until recently when the Facebook page came along, there was nothing, to stimulate my memory except me myself remembering those days. Georgie Girl, and it had a little girl that was running around a city or something. I remember that. And I never particularly liked that song, but the video, when it was on the radio, but the video made me remember it, and so I've always remembered it ever since.
There's a little story about that. I told you about the woman named Jean Williams in Philadelphia who had the dance studio.
Yes.
That was her daughter. One of maybe a dozen dancers who had been maybe 2 years there. They were pretty good dancers. And in that case, it was a little romantic story where she was in love with a guy who she kept going by and he didn't notice her. And at the very end of Georgie Girl, they both get into a roadster and drive off into the sunset.
Right.
And we did little romantic stories like that. But that's the kind of thing where the guy who shot that was a person who was a news photographer. He did it with his news camera on a lunch hour. Thought it up as they went along. Everything you see her doing, running around a tire in the water and sliding down a slide, were things that they quickly found and did. And this was like so much of that video that we did. No rehearsal, think it up as you go along, but uh, because it was the music moving, it didn't so much matter that there were mistakes. We did one video where the camera comes into the shot by mistake, and there was no way to edit it out. So we just left it, you know.
Right, that's terrific.
And people didn't mind. They watched it just as much, and that was the name of the game. So it was, it's hard to put it all together in my mind as to what came first and what came next and why we did what we did. But the secret to it was that it was top 40 and that we could repeat these little videos that were on little video reels. And of course, the horrible thing about it is that the bigger reels, which were sent to the stations, were like $300, between $200 and $300 a piece. We didn't have any money. We were, you know, a renegade operation, just getting by from day to day. And of course, we had to erase those reels when they came back. At the end of it all, we gathered up all the film and all the tape and stuck it in a garage in Miami, and it stayed there for 35 years until it was rescued by the University of Georgia. And the videotapes were actually, they were cooked in Burbank and restored and digitized. And I got hold of all that video myself from the university, and it's in their archives, but I also have it, and I put it online,
Fantastic.
and so that people on the Facebook page can watch the old videos, even full screen.
That is wonderful. Absolutely great.
So the technology has come along and baffled us all the way, and then we realized that we've become absolutely linked to it. We can't live without it. And you know, how would I find my son at the airport yesterday without my cell phone?
Right. Right. Well, Robert Whitney, thank you so much for talking with us. Thanks for sharing your memories about broadcasting and Top 40 Radio and WIL and the big battle between the three top stations in St. Louis.
Well, my very great pleasure, and I'm so appreciative for the award that you gave me, and I've had a wonderful time in the last couple days here.
Fantastic. And congratulations on that award, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we got 7 minutes left on this tape. Can I ask him something?
Sure. What I should have done, though, is I'm supposed to flip it around and ask, is there anything you wanted to add or anything about it?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Good.
Jerry, do you think that, this is for the St. Louis Archives, would it be interesting for, where were you? I just would like to know, when you were in St. Louis with the radio station, where was it? Where did you go? What were the offices like?
The day that I arrived with Stan Kaplan for my introduction to Balaban Radio, I was driven from the airport in the newsmobile with the gumball machine on top. I was very impressed with that, to the Coronado Hotel where the radio station was. The offices were upstairs where John Box's office was, and he was a very interesting guy with a great big office and a red telephone in a drawer for calling each of his managers. He kept a very careful short leash on all of the operations. He was a micromanager, scary guy, great big man with great big hands. He had a bottle of scotch in his drawer, and he would offer you a drink whenever you came in, even if you were working, you know, and very social, you know, happy big fellow. So that was upstairs. Downstairs were essentially two studios with a control room in between. One studio, and we didn't use both for music. One was the newsroom for all intents and purposes, and right outside was a teletype machine, maybe two. Down the hall was what was called the EMT, which was a great big plywood enclosure which had a gigantic metal plate in it. And at one end of the metal plate was a speaker, and the other end was a microphone which created reverb. And that signal, or the sound of the reverb, was fed back into the board so that the engineer could control the amount of reverberation that was present in all of the Balaban broadcasting. It was sort of a trademark. And I complained sometimes that that was too much. I complained sometimes that it wasn't enough. I was concerned with the sound of the station. John Box liked a great big sound. He liked radio voices. He liked Big Ben chiming in the background during the Budweiser Weather Watch, hourly on WIL. But that wasn't exactly what we needed, in my opinion, when I arrived there, and it wasn't within my experience. We spent a lot of time downstairs in that studio because a lot of our ideas were invented by the whole staff. It was a collaborative operation, and normally those meetings took place either just in the newsroom or hanging around in the hall or whatever, or in the bar at the Coronado Hotel, where we also got up and danced, as I remember.
Talk about the bar, the Coronado, where you guys went for lunch, just kind of the social aspect of radio.
Yes, and of course in a radio station people come and go for their shifts. And I don't think we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I think we, ate when we were hungry and drank when we wanted. And it was the kind of a culture where there were no hours. I mean, we might get an idea to do something in the middle of the night and do it in the middle of the night, which was not as easy at WIL as it was at KBOX. Because at WIL there were shifts for union people. There was some formality which was left over from what I would have called the old radio. So Dan Ingram, who I had made program director of WIL, and I would get on a plane Friday night, and by Sunday night we'd be home from Dallas with a bunch of production materials for WIL, which we produced ourselves. And when we put those into the sequence for people to play, the engineer would say, this wasn't done here, which was a violation of the contract. So we fought about that a lot. I don't remember exactly what those negotiations were like, but there was the concept that the union simply had to be sensitive to the emerging technologies. But that was not something that was happily held as an opinion by those people. But eventually, I think they all began to have a good time. As a matter of fact, one of those engineers came to Mars Broadcasting, became a terrific production guy, a guy named Chuck James, and he went on to CBS and had quite a career there. So he was one of the ones who was totally converted. Many of the others, particularly the older ones, didn't see it that way. And some of them left and some of them stayed, and we did our best.
I got 2 minutes left on the tape. One last question. Do you listen to radio today?
I certainly do. I certainly do. I have, like most old guys, I'm in my mid-80s, I have trouble, just as the parents of the children who were listening to my radio station had trouble with the music. It isn't that I have anything against anything, except that I've been trained to like certain things. I like strong melodies. I like the hooks that are in teeny bopper pop music because I like to repeat them. There's a part of my brain which never got used for heroin or anything. Instead, it got used for pop music. And I'm addicted to the hits many times. So I like to listen to golden oldies, pardon the old idea. Simply because it's my music, In fact, I was a little retarded because actually, in 1959, the first gold record came out, and it wasn't Great Balls of Fire or anything like that. It was Catch a Falling Star and Put It in Your Pocket by Perry Como. So there was a lot of Doris Day and Patti Page and Old Cape Cod hanging around, even in the top 40 rock and roll days. And a lot of Elvis's music, of course, was very melodic and romantic, Lonesome Tonight type of music. So a lot of what is thought to be true about pop music and rock and roll and so forth also has aspects of the older stuff in it also. My favorite singer and movie star as a 1947 guy was Doris Day. I was in love with her terribly. Moonlight Bay and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I was a romantic kind of thinker.
Love Me or Leave Me is a great movie.
And the rest of them.
Yeah.
Doris Kempelhoff, she lives in Carmel, California with her dogs still. I was thinking of dropping in and seeing her.
Got it, fantastic.
Okay.
I don't know if, well, I'll let you unmic him and everything.
Okay.
Take care of all that. Just
1
a
hour,
little-
man, you're right on the nose.
Yeah.
It was 1 hour.
Terrific.
That and